Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. This week, we have 2023's Minnesota Genealogical Society Pioneer Award recipient. Of course, that means she's a genealogist, and she's a founder of Anders Genealogical Services. We have Mica Anders. Welcome to the show, Micah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, pleasure to have you. As I've mentioned 3 times already, your background is in genealogy. You coined yourself the history detective. Mm-hmm. What sparked your passion for genealogy, like especially in uncovering African American and Midwestern U.S. histories?
Yeah, so for me, it really is kind of a weird roundabout path. I actually have a MFA in visual arts, of all things. So I was in grad school, and for school, I started doing the research of maybe 11 people's genealogy to make an art project. And the feeling I got giving people back their history, letting people meet ancestors they'd never met before, hearing the stories of their families of resilience, stories of triumph, stories of just everyday life that they'd never heard, just lit a spark under me, and I just wanted to keep doing this for other people and helping uncover our history. It's been taken from us for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, even growing up, did you always have this inquisitive sleuth nature to yourself?
I did. So I'm a super nerd. I've been reading mystery books for as long as I can remember. We started with the Little Nancy Drew, and then we had all these other mysteries. So it's always all about a mystery, and I've watched TV shows about mysteries, and I loved researching. I researched everything. Pre-internet, I had those encyclopedias open on the floor, learning stuff all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So like, how does one get into genealogy? Because I mean, you mentioned college, of course, but like, what was your path?
So for me, and actually for a lot of people who get into genealogy as a profession, it's roundabout. They now have a few degree programs in it, but most of us, our degrees are not in genealogy. Some people have degrees in history, others are like me, and it just became a hobby that became a passion that became a career. And it's really about taking classes, going to institutes. Some people choose to get certified, some people don't, but really it's just about experience.
Mm-hmm. And you were the first history fellow at the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum.
Absolutely.
How did your approach to working with underrepresented communities? How do you honor those stories? What was your approach to that?
So for me, the more research I was doing, I live in Minnesota. I'm not from here, but this is where I've lived since about 2006. And for me, I was doing some regular genealogy on a client, and I realized that their family, this Black family, had been in Minnesota like 7 generations, which just blew my mind because that's not something anybody's taught, is that we here in the Midwest have a history that goes back that far. Everybody talks about, everybody was in the South and then the Great Migration happened and nobody really came to the Midwest until maybe the 1920s to 1940s. And so I really wanted to change that narrative. I wanted to give towns and communities back their history. I wanted to talk about all of these people who, some of whom were founding members of some of these local towns that now are completely white towns and have no clue. So it's really about, changing the narrative and giving people back their stories.
Right. I visited Minneapolis for the first time back in late July.
Wow.
And I was pleasantly surprised that just the diversity, like the culture. I think there was a street that we went on where there were like a lot of African tribes, and we ate dinner at a Somalian restaurant, and they had a theater next to it. And from what I was told, is like, yeah, like you have all kinds of different like African countries, even Caribbean people of Caribbean descent that are based in Minneapolis. And I was like, who knew?
Right. It's this huge secret. Like I said, I'm not from here. And I always think about, do I want to stay here? The weather is terrible, right? Where can I go? But there's something about being able to go to the grocery store and hearing multiple different languages and seeing people who look like me and seeing people who look like any kind of way of looking, and just knowing that you're in a place where whoever you are, it's okay to be that person, but also you get to feel comfortable being you.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so you would so did you after being a fellow with the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum, did you stay on with them, um, or did you immediately transition into Anders Genealogical Services? Like, talk about that time frame.
Yeah, so I actually began my company about 10 years ago, about 2014. So this is my 10-year anniversary. And
Congrats.
thank you, thank you. And so when I did my fellowship, I already had my company. But at the time, a lot of my work focused just on clients. Like, say you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to learn more about my family." And so I would work with you to uncover parts of your family maybe that you didn't know about or just wanted to learn more about. But through my work with the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery, I I was able to really. It was the first time I was able to take what had been a passion project, which is uncovering local community histories, and have somebody validate it and say, you know what, this is important. You know what, we're going to put some dollars behind this. We're going to make sure other people understand how important it is, and that really helped me push that part of what I do forward to say, okay, there is a place for this, there is value in this, and people want to know more.
Mm-hmm. Was it a struggle at first getting Anders Genealogical Services off the ground? I'm going to mess it up
That's okay.
sometime during this interview.
That's okay. When I say it, I either just call it AGS or I just say, a lot of people are like, can we just say Anders Genealogy? I'm like, sure, whatever. We know what you're talking about. Kind of like my name, right? I know you're
Uh
talking about me. So I know everyone's like, why did you pick a name with and try and type out my email. It's just as bad, right?
yeah.
So it was a struggle. So when I first started, like I said, I have an art degree. So when I first started, I was doing genealogy and I was also working as a teaching artist and a public artist. So I really had pretty much two full-time careers simultaneously. Um, but I loved it because I'm a little bit right brain and a little bit left brain, and it allowed me to use all of my brain. And it just was really great. But in terms of trying to find clients and trying to have people understand the importance of genealogy, I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks I have is people don't even know the word.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, all kinds of people have done their DNA or they are just interested in learning about their family. They don't know there's like a job where you can hire somebody to help you with that. So that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks is people don't even know it exists.
Right. Well, that's definitely a challenge. I think also because I used to work in public libraries and academic libraries and special collections,
Ooh.
and I think there's a lot of similarities between the work that's done in special collections libraries and genealogical research.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people would come in. I worked at UNC Chapel Hill. People would come into UNC Chapel Hill and they would have one picture and say, "I have this picture. Help me."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that's something that you encounter on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
Just talk about the challenges that poses as a researcher. Just having limited information and trying to you know provide this service, even though there isn't much to go off of.
Yeah. So remember we talked about I love a mystery, right?
Uh
So for
huh.
me, that's you walking into my detective office with the only clue you have on the case. So for me, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, it's going to be a challenge, but I love a challenge. So the first thing I say is, please turn the picture over and hopefully there's at least a first name written on the back, right? And by the way, for
Mm-hmm.
everybody listening, please label your photographs because, oh my gosh, it makes a huge difference. In the future, somebody's going to turn that over and your name's going to be on there and then somebody's going to know who that actually was. But in terms of like, what do you do? So if I have a picture, I've gotten people who have given me military pictures. They're like, well, so somebody in my family and they're in a military uniform. So then, we research, okay, what kind of military might it be? How old might they be? We research the type of picture that it is. But really it comes down to, okay, what is the goal? Do you just want to know about this picture? Do you want to know how this picture fits with a human in your family? Do you want to understand how to get from you and the generations back to the ancestors that get you to that picture? So figuring out kind of what they want to know really helps me figure out what type of other clues I need to come up with to try and figure out who this person is in this picture or what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and I think especially within our communities, yeah, your sleuthing has to go to another level, especially in regards to the high percentage of broken families. Um, in regards to that, what advice do you give to people who want to explore their family history, but they're hesitant to, I guess, unravel some family secrets or potential um, hardship?
So I think the first thing is no matter what, you're going to hit a family secret. We've all
Mm-hmm.
got them. I think it's about how do you approach them. So, say, for example, you're really curious who one of your parents is and you were only raised with the other parent. Sometimes people feel like I need to wait until the parent who raised me is no longer around because they just don't want me to know.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, it's a relief that people are like, yes, I can finally let go of this thing I've been holding on behalf of my child this whole time. Um, Other times, I always just say proceed with caution and expect the unexpected. You don't
Right.
know what you're going to find. I've had clients who were adopted and took a DNA test, found their family, their biological family, and have amazing relationships with them. I have people who took a DNA test because they just wanted to see what percent Nigerian they might be, and they found out they have siblings that they didn't know about. I've had clients who have done, I mean, the gamut is, it's everything across the gamut. But I think what matters most is being open to being curious and being okay with the answer that you get, regardless of what it is.
Right.
And so, like, when you're looking for your other parent, we'll just say other, we don't know if it's the mom or the dad, right? If you only kind of are from a broken home, um, one thing is, for some people, I say, is the focus to gain a piece of you? Is the focus to learn about the people who raised you? Both are legit, but you kind of got to figure it out. For some people, we say, okay, you were raised by dad. Let's start with dad, and then let's go to his parents. If you're not interested in learning as much about mom, if mom wasn't around to help raise you. And that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. I don't think everybody thinks your family tree needs to be like this perfect arch with every branch filled out. And for some people, that's really important. And for other people, it's about, I want to know the stories of the people in my life who matter to me.
Right. So I want to share, I guess, my personal experience, which is what drew me towards having this conversation with you. So I grew up with my mother and adopted father. I'd never met my biological father or anyone in the family. So about 12 years ago, a cousin from my biological father reached out to me randomly while I was at work. I usually don't answer unfamiliar phone numbers. I decided to answer this one because it was from my hometown's area code. So I was like, this must be family. And my cousin Carol, she said hello. We had a conversation. I was shocked. She was like, "I'm your cousin. I have your biological father, your dad's phone number. Do you want to talk to him?" Like just completely out of the blue, random. And I was like, "Sure, we can have a conversation." I'm still not sure how she got my number, but she was like, "I'm going to call him tonight, and I'm going to tell him that we had a conversation, and we can take it from there." So he told her that, yeah, sure, we can, I'll talk to him. And um, I called him like the next day. We chatted. We agreed to meet like a month or so later in my hometown. It didn't happen. So I've always had tunnel vision. Like I just focus on, what's in front of me. I don't concern myself about things that are beyond my control. And um, I just was under the impression, this is never going to happen. I'm okay with it because I was in my early 30s at the time. So yeah, we just kept it moving. But people, relatives from that side of the family, just continue to contact me, and want to meet me and build a relationship. So it just gradually started happening. And 5 years ago, an aunt that I had met a few years prior to that had called me on Father's Day. And we were having a conversation, just checking up on me, seeing how I was doing. And she was like, "Did you call your dad?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't even have his number." So she gave me his number. Um, and I tried to call. He didn't answer. It went straight to voicemail. And a few weeks later, he called me, and we had another conversation. I was like, "I think it's time for us to meet." I was a little bit more forceful this time. And he said, "Next time you're in Tampa, let me know, and we'll do that." So about several weeks later, my best friend and my fiance at the time, we flew down to Tampa, met him, met my stepmom, met two brothers and a sister, and just had that experience naturally.
Wow.
And it was great. It was a great experience. We've continued to stay in contact over the years. He came to my wedding last year. He had his retirement party this past July. I was able to meet my biological brothers. I had three of them, met them for the first time, and just building relationships. So it's like when you were talking about that whole tree, I had half the tree for like 35 years of my life, and now it's starting to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's without it, I would feel like life is incomplete. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful story. And I like hearing, a lot of people feel like there's a timeline to it, right? Like it's supposed to be my other parent and I, we know each other exist and we should meet right away and that's it. But I hear your story, and I hear actually what I've heard a lot is it's not always the parent who you talk to first.
Right.
It's often an aunt or an uncle or a cousin who may have known about you your whole life. They had a hole in their heart wanting to have their niece, nephew, cousin. And because they're sort of that like second level relationship, it like wasn't really their place. And sometimes they're like, listen, I don't know what the parents are on, but I want my family back. Right. And they're sometimes the ones who make those initial reach outs. But again, I think the fact that this was really sort of a transition, and the fact that you were like, listen, I want this. And you just said, listen, we're going to make this happen. I think that's really important to talk about.
Right. And like, there's so many layers to this. I think that he wanted it as well. He just didn't. It's almost like you're afraid to look in the mirror and recognize that you made this mistake in the past, and you're afraid of the reaction of the other individual, and whether they're going to hate me or have resentful feelings towards me for things that I've done, or if he's going to continue to hold grudges. And I think the person that was instrumental on his end is, my stepmom, his current wife, because we had a conversation and she mentioned that she experienced the same thing where she met her biological father, later on in life. And just from her experience, she encouraged him to, not, let this prolong any further. Like, you want to be able to develop whatever type of relationship is possible with your son. And yeah, I thank her for that, even to this day, because there's still an uneasy feeling. Even though we've made progress, there's still an uneasy feeling. Like, it's difficult for me to call him dad or to say I love you. And I'm sure it's the same with him. But a lot of times between her and my wife, they're the ones that are, making sure that we're still making progress towards building some sort of relationship. And then it was difficult with my adopted father, just, feeling like me wanting to, I guess, build a relationship with my biological father. How is how's my adoptive father going to feel? So
Which
it was
is
kind of,
super common.
mm-hmm.
Super, super common. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely a growth. It's a lot of growth there. And I've learned to show grace in all directions
Yeah,
because of that.
absolutely. I think you really hit on something when we talk about that generational. I mean, generational trauma gets used a lot, but we'll use it because it's kind of a buzz phrase. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that your stepmom knew that feeling, and so in a way, she served a role to break, although she's not biologically related to you, in a sense, a generational curse. She said, "I know how this affected me, and I don't want that for your son." And I know, and so she's like, "You are instrumental in helping him have something different than what I got to have with my father." Or,
Mm-hmm.
all the things she has, all these I wishes, right? I could have known him earlier, whatever she has. So she was able to take those experiences and use them as a tool to help the two of you move your relationship forward in a really neat way.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like with that, when that individual walks into your office with that one picture or the story similar to what I shared, like are you like transparent with them as far as expectations and um, whether or not this could potentially be have more harm than good? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have those consultations before even beginning
Mm-hmm.
the search?
I do. I do. You never know what you're going to find. And so it's really important that I don't set people up for, for false expectations. I don't have a degree in psychology or anything like that. So I don't want to be put in a situation where it's now my job, and I've had to do it, to
Mm-hmm.
deliver news that's very upsetting. I've had to deliver news in my own family. We found out my grandma's dad was a different man than the man my great grandma was married to, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we met the family that we are biologically related to, and they thought our relationship was through some unmarried uncle. But then I had to sit across from this woman who is my grandma's half sister, and I had to explain to her that she is indeed my grandma's half sister, and that her relationship is through her own father to us. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. But even that conversation, where I definitely didn't expect to have it, it started with a lot of questions. So I ask a lot of questions before I'm just like, and here's some really big news that will change your life forever, right? So with her, and even with clients that come to me, I always say, again, are you prepared for the unexpected? Are you really comfortable with the family you have now? Because if the family structure and knowledge you have now is really foundationally important to you, and if it shifted, it would cause great stress that you don't know if you'd be able to recover from, this might not be a journey you want to take with me.
Mm-hmm.
We also talk about expectations. Even if I can find, for example, a bio parent or a bio grandparent, that doesn't mean they're ready or interested in having a relationship with you. Sometimes they may not even know you exist. And that's really hard, right? Because imagine somebody not knowing you exist. Like, that's just a crazy feeling. So, but it's possible that, for example, if you were raised by your mom, your dad may never have even known you were conceived or born.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have to sit with that. What does that do for his life? What does that do for your life when he's like, wait a minute, I'm 75, 80 years old, and you're telling me I've had a kid this whole time? Like, that can do some emotional damage to him that he also didn't sign up for. So there's so many pieces, and you just have to really think about how do you approach it. But you also talk about the joy, right? I helped a client who is in her 80s, and she'd never known who her biological father was. And obviously she's in her 80s, he's no longer living. But the
Mm-hmm.
closure of that chapter of her life that she got to have, having a name. We couldn't find any pictures, but we could learn about his story. We found cousins of hers. We were able to build out a whole piece, to your point earlier about like there's this piece of me that's like not there. So, that's the other side, is you can have these amazing closures. And I think too, there's a big expectation that if I find a name, I'll get to meet a person. And that's not always the case either. I helped another client who was looking for his biological father, who he actually didn't know his biological father until he was a teenager. He thought that the person who raised him was his biological father. So he got like a double whammy, right?
Right.
And it turns out we were able to find who his biological father was, but he had already passed away. And so there's that moment of, I had a dad, I don't have a dad. I'm hoping to get a dad, my dad's no longer living. There's a lot. But again, at the end of the day, regardless of all those feelings, he's so glad he went on that journey. And he's so glad he knows that part of his family. Same with you. Now he has another brother. Now he has cousins. Now he has aunties that he didn't know about. And they're helping fill that part of him.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338 or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
Yeah, and I'll always say, like, my adoptive father and that side of my family, they've always been amazing and supportive. So even as I'm embarking on this journey to get to know my biological father and relatives on that side, I just see it as an added bonus. It's like I had three families, well, 4 now because of my wife, 4 families instead of 2, and it's just an added bonus altogether. Now, you did mention something that I kind of wanted to touch on was the DNA testing. Like, how does that play a role in your work?
So especially when trying to find biofamilies, it's almost 100% necessary. Unless you're able to already give me all the information and you just can't find the person, then I get to put on my like private investigator hat, and that's really fun too. Then you get to go sleuthing around and trying to find people. But with DNA, it's interesting because a lot of people take a DNA test because they just want to know what percentage this they are, what percentage that they are, their ethnicity report, right? They didn't know that it actually has these other abilities to unlock all these things. DNA tests are amazing. DNA tests can take us past what enslavement took away from us. So think about that. Think about, for a lot of us, like we get to this sort of what's called a genealogy brick wall around 1870, and we might not know anything about our families before then. Now, in genealogy, we have paper records that we can use also, right? We have different tricks and techniques to get through all of that. But with DNA, we often are able to put families back together, our own families, in ways that paper trails don't always do. But, like I said earlier, you have to be ready for wherever it takes you. I've had multiple people find siblings they didn't know they had. I've had people learn that they'd fathered a child that they never knew about. I've had people learn that one of the parents they thought was their parent was not their parent. One of their grandparents was not their grandparent. But I've also had somebody who knew their mom was adopted find her mom's parents, bio parents. Or, I mean, there's so many pros and cons, but I would say for the people who take it just to learn like their ethnicity percentages, just know that it's more of an art than a science, and they shift a lot. So one time you're going to be super Scottish, and the next time all the Scottish is gone, and now it's replaced with something else. And you're like, where does Scottish come from? Well, the way it works is every testing company, their ethnicity estimates are only based on who's tested with them. So like if you tested at 23andMe and you tested at Ancestry and you tested at MyHeritage, your ethnicity reports would be similar, but they wouldn't be the same. So that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. It's kind of like getting a credit check.
Exactly. That's why there's
You get
three
a,
bureaus.
um, yeah, like how do you avoid confirmation bias?
Oh my gosh, that is like my favorite topic. So confirmation bias, for those who don't know, basically means you find two people, they have the same name, you think they're the same person. And so you add them to your tree, and all of a sudden you've actually built out a family tree of people you're not actually related to at all. So an example could be my daughter, her name is Ruby. Ruby has like 5 Rubies at her school. There's all these Rubies. And there's some with last names similar to her last name. So in the future, if somebody were researching at her school and looking for her, they might actually find this other person whose name is almost the same as hers. Their birthdays are around the same time. They have the same middle initial. They literally, if you didn't know it, you would think they were the same person, just mislabeled on a record. That's how confirmation bias happens. Because it happens all the time. There's so many people. If you've ever Googled your name, even if you think it's unique, somebody's got your name somewhere.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you might think you're on your family and you're really on somebody else's. So it's really about just doing your due diligence, right? Don't just look at one record and say, okay, I found my people. Make sure you look all around and say, okay, well, are they in the right place? Is it the right time? Are their parents' names right? Are all their kids' names right? You have to really dig a little deeper to make sure you're on the right people.
Right. All right. So not only having your ancestry is important for just filling out the family tree, but I mean, I know there's other examples like health wise or just a sense of being, like your community. Like, could you talk about some of the other reasons why knowing your genealogical background is so important?
Yeah, I think both of those you talked about are really great. I'll talk about both of them. So from a health perspective, there's a lot of health disorders that are genetic. In my family, for example, a lot of us have what's called the BRCA gene, BRCA, and it's a cancer gene. I have it. My sisters all have it. My dad had it. My cousins have it. And a lot of us have already had cancer and gone through treatment and all of that. But in knowing that, we were able to get preventative care. We were able to get it early, so it wasn't as bad as maybe what it could have been for some of us. Others, unfortunately, it was. But knowing your family history from a medical place can help you be informed. It can help you make good decisions. It can help you fight against the doctors who don't want to listen and don't want to believe you, because we know that's part of what we have to deal with too, right? But you can walk in and say, here's my chart. Here's showing all the people who have been affected by whatever this illness is in my family. You have to listen to me. So it really just gives you ammunition and proof to say, doctors, you need to listen to me. It helps you feel confident in what you're experiencing, and it can help make sure that you're getting the treatment or preventative care that you need. And from the really knowing who you are side of things, I have so many examples of just these really like serendipitous things that happen. I had a client who I was researching her family in Jamaica, and I found out that 3 generations were metalsmiths, blacksmiths. And I shared this with her, and she started crying because she's like, I'm a jeweler. She had no knowledge that this was literally a multi-generational joy path job in her family. And it almost had just come in and through her hands, through her ancestors. And so it's something that she also had a passion for. There's so many stories like that. Generations of musicians. You didn't know it. All of a sudden you find out 3 or 4 generations were all musicians. You're like, well, now I understand me better. Or, just getting a sense of from the not as positive side, because I always try to keep it balanced, because it's not all flowers and roses, right? You'll have somebody who maybe the relationship they had with their grandma was really difficult. Grandma was not the loving, caring grandma you wanted. She wasn't all the hugs and the cookies and whatever you think of when you think of a grandma. But then, maybe I was hired to research grandma, and we find out, oh, well, she bounced back and forth from her mom to her dad, to foster care, to this, to that, to the other. Oh, she was never taught how to be the loving and caring grandma. And then instead of you seeing her as this cold and distant person, now you can feel for what she went through. You better understand her. It brings you a closeness to her that you weren't able to get through hugs and things like that. And so I think that's really the power in understanding who came before you.
Uh-huh. Cool. You mentioned earlier in the interview about people doing their ancestry and realizing that, they're, say, 15% Nigerian. I kind of wanted to follow up with that immediately because my wife is Nigerian. So last year during our wedding, we obviously had an American ceremony and a Nigerian ceremony. And I was really nervous about the Nigerian ceremony and not, disrespecting the culture. Mm-hmm. And during the intro, and me and my guys were walking in and dancing, everybody loved it. They were like, "You dance like you're a Nigerian." So come to find out, my mom reached out to a cousin that's based here in Miami, and he did a genealogical test and found out that, we do have Nigerian in our blood. And I shared that with my wife and my in-laws, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised," because a lot of people were like, "Is he Nigerian?" Or if there's a side-by-side picture of me and my wife, they're wondering which one of us are of Nigerian descent. So that was an interesting development, and we've since visited Nigeria last month, and I was able to just embrace and love on family there firsthand. Just talk about that feeling that you have when you see someone that walks through your door and they share stories afterwards of the fulfillment and just how life has just been different because of the work that you've done.
Yeah, so I had a client whose ancestor was formerly enslaved. We found out who enslaved him. We found out how he got his freedom. And we found out that part of how he got his freedom was through fighting in the Civil War. We figured out where he fought. We figured out where he'd been stationed. And they actually took a trip out to Camp Nelson, which is where he was stationed when he was in the Civil War. And they said, it's one of the only Civil War, it's one of them that's still around, and it's not too different in terms of the layout, right? So they said to be able to walk on the grass, just walk on the grass where they know he had been, where they know he'd been stationed, where they knew that was his first place he got to be a free man, was so powerful. So powerful. It just, they said, they'd seen pictures of him, they knew who he was, but that being in place changed things in a way that they didn't even think was possible until they were walking on that grass.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
So does that ever like when you hear that or you discover it, it's just tears trickling down?
Oh, it never gets old. It never gets old. There's something so powerful about getting you back, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've had so many generations of, we're not going to talk about what happened before. We're not going to talk about where we came from. Don't bring that up. That was painful. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. And so it was just systematically taken from us through all the trauma and the pain, and to find the joy within that is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll say on my adopted father's side, we always have family reunions, every 2 years. On my mom's side, we've never had a family reunion. My great uncle, he was living in DC at the time. So in 1999, he was just forget it. I'm going to finance this myself. And he got immediate family together before he passed away. But just talk about the importance of family reunions to you know, continuing on the generational um, connections within a family unit, and how that makes it easier for someone such as yourself, where there's already most of the puzzle already put together.
Mm-hmm. So I have so many family reunion stories. One is this. I have a client who brings me to the family reunions. So at the family reunions every year, every other year, I give a presentation, like an update on what we found about the ancestors. But also
Mm-hmm.
while I'm there, I get to sit down with the elders. And we're talking a family reunion that goes back 3 or 4 generations and then out to all the kids and then back down. It's big. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
And to be able to sit with the elders and these things that often for us are just, we just have to research them. For example, they'd owned this building in this community, and there's no description of the building anywhere. There's ads for it in the newspaper and things like that. But I was able to sit at the family reunion and say, look at all these newspaper clippings I found, advertisements for people, come to the Sunday service or come to the late night barbecue or whatever. And this elder cousin was able to say, oh, I remember when they built that. I can tell you what it looked like. I can tell you how they built it. I can tell you. And all of those pieces that when you don't have those elders, and you don't have these multiple generations sitting around listening, and even those who aren't listening, I'm recording for our next presentation, right? It's amazing. And to be able to be able to take your family back that far, specifically because that many family members have stayed in touch,
Mm-hmm.
definitely it changes what I do, right? So instead of starting at grandparents, great grandparents, I'm starting way back here in the family in the 1870s because they're connected going down from there. It's amazing. I also have situations. So my family, there were, my mom's number 4 of 10. So I have, like 25, 30 first cousins. It's very hard to get all of us together. But I was fortunate enough that my mom would go back and forth up to Michigan where her parents lived a lot. And so I would get to see my first cousins. And then I would get to see their kids and they would get to see my kids. But it became a smaller grouping. But I know for my daughter, even though she doesn't now get to see the whole family on a regular basis, because we also don't do a good job of family reunions, because trying to get 10 people together, and that's just the adults. I call them the adults. Like I'm an adult, but like they're the adults.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our parents and aunts and uncles they're the adults. Trying to get them to get it all planned out is a lot. So we do mini reunions. We'll just do like, okay, maybe 2 or 3 cousins get together with their kids and grandkids. And even just that little connection, I think it helps my daughter understand who she is. We get to have these moments where you're like, wait, your ear shape's like my ear shape. Wait, that personality trait, I have that personality trait. And then another cousin's like, I have that personality trait too. And then it's these things that, again, helping you understand you. These things that you think are so unique and special about you are a family trait that's been passed down, a family behavior sometimes that's been passed down. And by having those family reunions and being in that hopefully safe family space, you're able to learn some of those things and keep those memories alive and talk about those stories where you're like, oh, you remember what grandpa used to cook for Thanksgiving every year? And then now my kid's getting to hear about somebody she never got to meet, her great grandpa. Oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's what you guys used to eat. That's what the house looked like. That oral history that's so a part of our culture anyway, that's part of how that oral history gets to stay alive, is by having those multi-generational family gatherings.
Right. Do you feel like that's a tradition that's kind of losing momentum when, as far as with say like our generation and younger, it's a lack of a focus on preserving these traditions and keeping the family tree alive?
I think it's the busy culture.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find the time on whatever day of whatever month for whatever weekend to get everybody together when it's like, well, I got to get out my itinerary and I got to plan my schedules and I got to see what the kids are doing and I got to see what my spouse is doing and I got to see if we can afford it and I got to see, right? Because now we got costs too. Not everybody's, think about it. A lot of times family reunions were in a location where people were driving distance. They might not all still live in the same town anymore, but oftentimes we weren't trying to get, transnational flights or whatever to get back home. So I think that's a piece too. What I've noticed a lot is people care as they get older, but when they're younger, they don't realize they should care. And then they get older and they feel frustrated they didn't care earlier when people were around to talk to.
Okay, so like not only the extended family, the importance of that, but I think it expands beyond that to the community and the implications tied to that. Do you feel like schools, public libraries, churches, they should be more invested in teaching the local and familial histories?
Yeah.
To strengthen those bonds within the community?
I think so. I think there's a couple factors. So I don't know about where you live, but here you don't have to go to your neighborhood school anymore. So we already are losing a community in that sense, right? I think when I've done research on like the early African Americans who lived in a certain small rural area, that area might just now be starting to, as I say, brown up again, right? It might be more Latino immigrants coming in. It might be more African Americans moving into town. It could be whatever, right? Anything you can think of. But they're walking into that town thinking they're the first. And sometimes that's a great feeling. And for some, it's more of a feeling of like, will I be accepted? This is new. They've never had this before. But when I bring that history in, I've heard specifically from high school students who are like, oh, so this isn't new. And that feeling of like, okay, so everybody acting like I'm the first Black person ever to be here, they're able to be like, no, actually, I'm not. Let me tell you about these other people who were business owners, who were entrepreneurs, and they have this, we'll call it ammo for lack of a better word. I don't know if that's the most positive way I could spin it, but it's empowering for them. So by learning the history of the places they live, I, for example, live in a historically Black neighborhood that's very rapidly gentrifying, very rapidly, in a weird way where a lot of the people who are moving in to this historically Black neighborhood who are not part of that community are excited to say that they live in a historically Black neighborhood, but don't realize that as they continue moving in, the historically Blackness of the neighborhood will no longer be. It's very strange, right? It's a very strange dynamic. But the community I live in has done an amazing job of keeping that history alive. We've got the name on things. They just changed the street name. We've got his signs, historic neighborhood, and it gives a sense of pride in place. And having a sense of pride in place is important. It says that we matter, our history matters. Our history is part of the fabric of whatever community we live in. And even for the kids to be like, I'm from this important neighborhood. I'm from this historically Black neighborhood is very different than I'm from this like Black neighborhood, right? It changes the mindset. And there's nothing wrong with either, but people can tear one down easier, right? Who want to come at you. But when you spin and say, no, this is a historically Black neighborhood, you have different ammunition to say back to them. Again, good, bad, indifferent, because I think it shouldn't be that way for whatever kind of neighborhood you come from. But it just says, I can have a sense of pride in place.
Right. So you would say that's the trick to, I guess, doing gentrification in a way that still preserves the history that came from.
Yeah, isn't that weird? Because it absolutely is not that historically Black. It's still historically Black. But actually what's funny about that, and this is like sort of a side tangent, it wasn't Black first. It was Jewish before it was Black, but we don't talk about it as a historically Jewish neighborhood. So even with that, we're missing a piece, because a lot of the ways it became a historically Black neighborhood is because when the Jewish community was here, when they left and moved to start another community in another part of the city, they made sure that there were no covenants or anything on their home that meant Black people couldn't live here.
Uh-huh.
That isn't even talked about. So that's what's even funnier, is that history is gone.
Right. All right, Micah, what do you see when you look in the mirror?
I see, gosh, that's a great question. I see resilience. I see pride. I see somebody who picked a path that didn't exist and just kept walking and waiting for those doors to open, or pushing some of them open and making it happen.
Mm-hmm. What's something about you that people would find most surprising?
I'm a dancer. I started ballet when I was 5. I belly dance now. I actually have a show next weekend. Yeah.
Okay.
See? Surprising.
Yeah. I wasn't predicting that. But I will say I'm surprised when you were talking about your family and how they have many reunions. Well, you all have many reunions.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're not involved in the planning at all.
Well, here's the deal. When you're still the kids, because we're still the kids. That's what I was trying to hint at before, right? We're still the kids.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So there's a point where we call ourselves the cousins. The cousins have all kind of plans. But at what point is it disrespectful, even though we're in our 40s and 50s and 30s, to be like, okay, mom, aunties, uncles, we got this one? And at what point is it just, we got this one, you've done your part, right? It's that delicate balance. So we control what we can, and we have mini reunions instead.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I mean, you're an award-winning genealogist, and you're gracefully taking a back seat and planning your own family reunions. I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating place to be. I have to
Cool.
take that initiative and say, we're doing it.
Uh-huh. All right, so as we prepare to wrap up, definitely talk about AGS and the services you provide.
Yeah, see, the acronym flows way easier, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I'm not struggling.
So we do a few different things. So I have a team of researchers who are amazing, and we work one-on-one with clients. They'll come to us, kind of like you said, and say, hey, I want to learn more about my family history. And we'll have a meeting, we'll sit down, learn what they want to learn, and then they hand over everything they know, be it 2 scraps of paper or 3 binders full of information, and we'll research their family and give them back their ancestral stories. That's one option. Another is I work one-on-one with people who are really hobby genealogists. They're like, I really want to learn how to do this myself. I'm having fun on the adventure. I'm just stuck. And they just work with me for a couple hours, and we kind of work through those brick walls and have little breakthrough sessions. And then they go off and come back when they get stuck again. And the other thing I'm doing, the other is I'm starting an online academy. So for people who just want to stay at home in their bunny slippers and learn about genealogy and how to do it, they can do that. But then I also work with historical societies. I work with libraries. I work with nonprofit organizations. I even work with some corporations to help tell their history, and we turn it into exhibits. So that's that's how I keep my art part going.
Okay, cool. All right, so what's next then? What's next for you? Other than belly dancing.
Right, that's next weekend. Next for me is we're growing. Next for me is getting this academy up and running. I'm really excited to do it, and I've got some merch coming, because everybody's like, when are you making merch? You need some t-shirts. So I'm making some shirts and all the fun merchy stuff.
Okay, cool. All right, so plug your whereabouts, and feel free to leave us with a parting shot.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I figure I'm in my 40s. That's enough to keep up on social media for now.
Yep.
Anders Genealogical Services. It's a lot of letters, but I am Googleable, so it's way easier to find me there sometimes than anywhere else in case you want to try and spell all that out. And I think the thing I want to leave everybody with is start today. It's as simple as finding an elder, asking some questions, recording them, whether they know you are or not. Just capture those stories. You may not even be interested right now, but when you are, and that person may not be around, you're going to be so glad you just asked some questions. Just, how did you get to elementary school? What was your favorite teacher's name? Super basic questions, and let that go wherever they want to take it.
Right. Micah, thank you. I would say from, speaking from personal experience, just the joy on the faces of those, that I've met over the last 10 years, relatives that I never knew existed, or I never knew that they would come. It's those hugs and those laughs and just sharing stories and, adding this information to your memory bank is priceless. And the work you do, I think it's so valuable, and we need you. We need you in our communities, continuing to do the good work. And yeah, like she said, visit AndersGenealogicalServices.com.
All those letters.
Yeah, whether you're in Minnesota or not, right?
Right. I have clients all across the country. I have clients in the Caribbean, clients in England. One of my farthest away clients was actually in China, American, who was living abroad in China.
All right, cool. All right, so it doesn't matter if you're outside of Minnesota, outside of the country. Visit AndersGenealogicalServices.com. Let Mica Anders help you out. Get her sleuthing on. And for Stop, Look, and Listen, I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.
Thank you.